everybody. So thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to introduce to you Tracy Jenkins. She is an internal executive coach at UNC Health. She has extensive experience in career coaching. And of course, I have to note that she also worked as an educational consultant and in clinical research for GSK. So Tracy's going to tell us a little bit about informational interviewing today. It's a topic that I get really excited about because it was just so integral to how I got to where I am today in my position. So no matter the career path you're on, no matter the point of your career that you're at, informational interviewing can be a really big benefit to you. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Tracy to get started. If you have questions along the way, please put them into the Q&A and we'll take some questions at the end.
All right. Thank you so much, Jillian and Susan, for that marvelous introduction. I think there's always a story behind informational interviewing. Everyone has a story about what that experience was like for them once they start launching on that path and do it from a deliberate perspective. I have a story as well, so I'll start with the brief version. I can go long and hard on it, so I'll try not to do that. So essentially, it was about 5 years ago, I had been looking for a job. I had been in industry, as you have probably had a chance to look at my bio. I had been in industry. I had been at GSK. And I was starting to, and I had 2 children. And I was doing some part-time work for a while. And then I kind of took some time off, probably only 2 years. And then I started wanting to get back. So I started applying to various jobs in education and as well as in the industry, the biotech industry. And I deliberately was sending out close to 80 resumes over a 2-year period and literally getting nothing. And over time, it doesn't take longer than 3 months of not getting anything for self-doubt to start to become the gremlin that gets larger and larger to the point that you're absolutely frozen by the end and just not want to try anymore, and your self-esteem takes a nosedive. And I was in pretty bad straits. I think my husband was working really hard to try to buoy my emotions during that time. Didn't work. So I found a career coach just by happenstance. And she, had to spend several months trying to get me off the floor and get me to a space where I could actually start the process again. But I couldn't do it the way I was doing. It wasn't working. She said, well, let's do some work around what you love doing and naturally do well and where your true value is. And then we spent a couple months doing that. You don't need to do that as much as probably I needed to do. And she said, now you're ready to start informational interviewing. And I had no idea what it was. And immediately the self-doubt comes roaring back. And I'm like, no one's going to want to talk to me. They didn't, talk to me when I sent resumes. They didn't even reach out. So nope, probably won't work. So there was some coaching around that. And I pretty much said, okay, I have no other choice. I started to develop my own system of doing informational interviews once I got over the hurdle. And I decided no longer to submit resumes. And I spent 3 months doing informational interviews entirely. I developed a 7-step process, which is what I'm going to share with you today. Over the course of 3 months, I sent out approximately 30 informational interview requests, emails. And I had close to 25 informational interviews in a 3-month period. And in that 3-month period, I had 2 to 3 job offers. The third one was kind of like, we'd like you to apply. The other 2 were offers without ever asking for a job. So what it showed me is I was showing up authentically and intentionally. And the process kind of bared that out for me. So that's what I'd like to share with you today, is that process. So if you wouldn't mind, Jillian, advancing the slide. I think I got to this space of understanding. Whoops, here we go. I've got a little thing sticking up on my screen too. keeps the little alerts that show up on my screen, which you may be able to see. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is where I got to. I started to realize that I had an opportunity through informational interviewing to do much more choice than I thought I was allowing than I was allowing myself by submitting resumes. I was able to choose who I wanted to talk to and set up meetings without having to wait for someone to reach out for me. I was creating the path forward versus waiting for someone else to create it for me. So this is something that I would hope that you would experience if you decide to do this, do these 7 steps that I'm going to share with you today. So if you wouldn't mind advancing, I'll just go like this, Jillian, so I don't like, there you go. So informational interviewing involves several things. If you kind of click it, it'll go, yes, there you go. It allows you, first off, to have the opportunity to share and learn. Okay. And by sharing and learning, it's a reciprocal process, informational interviewing. It's almost like everything I ever wanted to do or learn happens in kindergarten. You learn how to share and you learn how to learn. That's kind of informational interviewing. It's a reciprocal process. It's not them here and you here. It's a conversation. It's different than an interview. And sometimes people don't like the word interviewing, so you could call informational sharing. If that is a hurdle for you and the interview is a problem for you, which was one of mine. I'm like, interviewing, it's really about sharing you and allowing someone else to share them. And in the process, you're exploring what's it like to be in their shoes doing the work they're doing, because you're reaching out to them because it may be something you're interested in. Okay. And then you get a chance to share yourself with them and they get to explore with you. So it's a mutual exploration. It's a connection as a result. And it is a form of networking. And part of the reason that tree was at the beginning of my slides was because what happens through informational interviewing is because your tree becomes larger, your network. And so networking is also a difficult word for people, and it can be a barrier because, I don't like networking. Well, this is actually networking, but it's done in a very formal way, but also informal way, because once you get in and start talking to someone, it becomes informal because it's conversation. And through that process, as you meet more and more people and make more and more connections, the tree gets larger. Oh, there was a sign. I can't remember my own sign. So there's 7 steps towards career success based on informational interviewing that I will share with you. So the first step, if I remember the next slide, well, this slide kind of shows, you can kind of advance past this one because it's just, these are the 7 steps and these are the little signals for each of the steps. So the first step is exploring your interests. Okay. So oftentimes we think, well, I kind of know what I want to do. I could skip this step. And I always, as a career coach, would stop people and say, let's just back up and do this just to make sure we're not missing anything. So Jillian, if you don't mind advancing, the next slide has this Venn diagram. And you'll notice that each of these circles represents an area to explore for yourself. So I recommend, and if you have looked at the handout, this is the first step listed in the handout, is to develop a kind of a list, or you could, concept map it, or however, if you're more visual, you want to put it out on a vision board, it's up to you. I'm a list person, so I did lists. So if you develop a list around what you're good at doing, what am I really good at doing? And I would advise just doing it freehand first before maybe using assessment tools like Clifton Strengths. Clifton Strengths is an assessment tool that will identify your strengths and give you actual language you can use to describe your strengths, other than just one word descriptions. So that's another tool you can use if you're like, well, I can't really think of what I'm good at doing, or you only think of what you're good at doing in a certain role versus, I'm good at a lot of things. So this is your chance to open up that box, and everything that comes to mind personally and professionally that you're good at doing goes in the circle. The goal is to kind of open your brain, not run around a certain track, down a certain track that you have done in the past, but also everything else. The next list or the next circle is, what do you love doing? What am I I think an overused word is passionate about. Maybe it's what do I just, when I do it, I get energized. I love doing it. That kind of thing. Put that in your next list or circle. And then look at the two circles and kind of go, hmm, there's some things I'm really good at doing, but I really don't like doing them. Okay, those are signs, and we often get pigeonholed in roles to do things that you're really good at that. We need you to do that, and so you're doing it, but it doesn't fulfill what you love doing, and so it always feels like an uphill battle doing those things. So it's really trying to get a sense of where those two circles marry. What you do, what are the things I love doing, what I'm good at. Yes, that's what you're trying to get a real good sense for yourself around. And again, personally and professionally, and what you love doing as well. I had someone who, um, she was an IBM employee. She was reading the writing on the wall that pretty soon, they were letting people go. And she thought, I see the signs. So I want to meet with a career coach and get a sense of like what's next for me. And we did this exercise. And one of the things that showed up that she loved doing was gardening. And she was quite good at it. She people love to come over to her garden and look what was there. And she's like, I've gotten a lot of accolades and I love doing it. She goes, but that is not something that is going to sustain me. So see this third circle, what can you get paid to do? That is a point of stick. People get stuck there. So I'm like, keep that part of the Venn diagram out when you do your exploration of the two areas, what you love doing and what you do well. And then bring that in and do a real conversation with yourself around if it's something I really love doing and I do well, maybe I'm getting in my own way by thinking I can't sustain myself in this space. I won't make the money that I think I'm going to need to make. So it's having that conversation with yourself and seeing if there is reality there, or is there a change in lifestyle that needs to happen in order for you to honor those what you love doing and do well. In that person's case, she went to school in horticulture while she was still at IBM. She still had a runway to be able to do that, was able to pay for, and that school was in horticulture at NC State. And she's currently out in San Diego doing landscape gardening and design. And she loves it. And that's her second career. So, yeah, I just want to keep that. This is your opportunity to explore and widen that box, that playground for yourself. Okay, so if we move to the next one, your dream job is where all those intersect. I will say the word dream is a very weighty. I will change this slide and say, you know, your dream job, I'll put it in air quotes, is a place where almost everything aligns and it feels like you're energized and you love doing it. And that may change as you evolve as a person over time. So where those three intersect now might be different 10 years from now. So it's often that you need to redo this process, not often, but it's expected that you would redo this process maybe once every 5 years, reassess. And so the dream job is not you're going to be in that job that's the job forever for you. No, it's the job in the moment that feels very natural. Okay, so that was the first step. The second step is now I've got a sense of potential buckets or areas that I'd like to explore after I've done my what I love doing and do well. It may be roles, it may be areas that show up on your two spheres, and you need to find people that do that kind of work. And so how do you find those people so that you can start talking to them and go, is this really what I want for myself? What is it like for someone else to have experienced that? And through that process, you're learning, is this where I want to be? Or you're also getting confirmation that, yeah, I've known this. And I walk out of these interviews being really energized, which is a sign, keep on the path. If I walk out of it, go, not, maybe I interview one other person in this area or two others and kind of go, yeah, nope, not feeling traction in there. That pathway of interviewing that in that area starts to die off. and you'll be focusing on these other areas. Um, and it may be that it's specific companies, all one role, but three different companies you're pursuing, right, in that path, and you're interviewing people in those areas. And then you're like, I'm not really liking what I'm hearing around the culture in that environment, just getting that sense that might die off, and you'll pursue another path. So just explaining that that can happen, and that's part of the natural evolution of informational interviewing. It's all part of the process. So where do you find people? LinkedIn is like, it wasn't so great when I was wasn't as great of a tool about 10 years ago, but it's really becoming amazingly quick at being able to type in the search bars people that are in roles that reflect, and you can type in what you love doing and do well, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of people at different organizations. And I just, use my index paper, because I'm old school, and I would write the name of the person, the contact information if I could get it from LinkedIn, and the company of the organization. I have Red Hat up there. So if you know that you just want to look at a company, and you can sometimes find people on websites, and other times if they're big companies, you can't. So, just look at all different places to find names of people that you could potentially interview. The next, I think I give you some other articles. Sometimes, there are people that have written some really cool articles from various companies that are interesting to you. There's no reason not to have an informational interview with someone that has written an article. Actually, that could be a landmine of all, not landmine, treasure trove of all different places you could go from there, because that person could say, who else you could talk to, and now all of a sudden you're off to the races, in an area that you picked that article and that person because there's something in that article that was fascinating to you. Okay, so career fairs, another opportunity to find people. If you are at a career fair and you really are at a booth and you're like, this person seems really interesting, I talk to them, see if you can get their card or get their contact information, and say, hey, I'd really like to sit down and talk with you a little more about what you do. And there you go. They're all going on this list, whether it's electronic or by paper, the list of people to contact. Next is alumni directories. I did this because LinkedIn wasn't such a strong tool. I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, and they have a giant alumni directory. And I went in and typed in areas. At the time, I was looking at academic advising, and then I morphed into something else. That's a whole other story. You don't need to hear all the twists and turns of this informational interviewing process. I'd be here for 3 hours. But so you can type in those areas, and will come up, and you can say what area of the country, and it will come up people in your area that are doing the kind of work that you're interested in talking to them about. So I use the alumni directories, and I think reference materials. So I know the library system here in North Carolina has something called Reference USA, which is a huge database of companies and organizations in North Carolina. And oftentimes, sometimes in some of those, they list people. So that is another source to find people. GuideStar.com is an interesting, also, it's for nonprofits. So it's like a big clearinghouse of nonprofits that exist in the country, and you can do a search if you're looking in the nonprofit space, and then oftentimes when you get to their websites of various areas that you'd like to explore, you can find people's names there too. And then I also have the Triangle Business Journal as another source. And then networking events, like similar to the biotech in networking events. Of course, sometimes there's going to be people that you talk to that say, hey, I'm really interested in this. And you're like, oh, I am too. Can I get your information? We can talk. And then they may have talked to other people. So it's always, there's the tree getting larger. Asking people, who would you suggest I connect with, is an important question to ask in an informational interview, which we'll talk about in a second. So that's how you can essentially find people. So now you have your list, and you're about ready to send your informational interview request email. So the first thing I say, this is the third step. Um, Before sending your informational interview request email, because I did it very formally through email and not LinkedIn, because I felt like I could write more. I could really share who I am in the email. Um, Whereas in LinkedIn, it didn't feel comfort. It didn't feel like it was, it felt like LinkedIn was more of like, can we meet for coffee kind of thing versus I would like to meet with you for, a real, this is exactly what I'd like to talk about. And I couldn't write that much in a LinkedIn little connection. I could write it in an email. So I would do emails, but I would never say don't do it through LinkedIn. If you can't find them, you can't find an email, then I say go for it. Go through LinkedIn. But I did it through email. So, what dressing up your core skills are is like oftentimes we use these buzzwords like results driven, goal oriented to describe who we are. It's on our resumes. Um, People's eyes glaze over. They don't really get a chance to know you by what. So, what I ask you to do is look at those core skills that are on your resume or in how you just in the spheres that you identified, use those words that you've identified, not the buzzwords. And so if it is a buzzword, I'm goal driven, what do you mean by goal driven? And use those words in your description of yourself. And you can even use it on your resume, honestly, because goal driven is really overused right now. So what goal driven was for me was solutions focused. What interpersonal personal communication for me meant I was very receptive. I'm a receptive person. I'm very intuitive. I can very perceptive. I chose the word receptive to describe myself. I'm motivated to helping others achieve their goals, which was also another. That's also what I meant by myself being goal driven, which didn't say the same thing as motivating to help others achieve their goals. So why I didn't choose that word just didn't sound buzzy enough on my resume. I'm trying to flip it over on its side and like, what is it you're doing when you're doing those buzzwords and use those words when you describe yourself. That's what I mean by dress up your core skills. Not make them up, just make them more solid and more authentic. And then another way to do that, and this is why I have the Clifton Strengths again. I get no kickback from Clifton Strengths, but I use this tool often. I just love the fact that the descriptions that come in paragraphs about how you show up using like empathy or adaptability, you can use those words if you're having trouble coming up with words for yourself. So it's a really cool tool. You can go online. I think it's $20 for your top 5, and it's close to $60 um, for your top 34 or for your 34 ranking, which Gallup does. It's through Gallup. That's the company that offers Clifton Strengths. So it is a really well validated and reliable tool, often used in the strengths world. So next step is how do you request that informational interview? And I already kind of foreshadowed that I did it through email. So the email was the golden nugget. That is really what got me in when I said I sent 30 of them and I got 27 or 25 plus or minus 2 opportunities to get in front of people and talk to them. So in the email, essentially, I think there's you want to start. I had 2 paragraphs. That was all. So the first paragraph is just the first sentence says, I'm currently in active pursuit of learning more about whatever it is that I was interested in learning about, where my core skills and this is where I would list those dressed up core skills, motivating others to achieve their goals, receptive communication, and solutions focused. I think, and I would flip them around a teeny bit. I would change the wording slightly depending on who the audience was. Are keys to my success. That's how I wrote it. And it's like that was the first sentence. So I was saying in the first sentence, this is what I want. This is what I'd like to meet with you to talk to you about. I'm really in this pursuit of looking at this area. And hopefully the area that you're interested in getting in is where they're at, right? They're doing something like that. It might not be exactly the same, but they can do their connections for you and for your, and you can do it for them by listing those core skills. Because they're like, oh yeah, that's what I use in my role. Notice in the first sentence, it doesn't say, didn't ask to talk to them. I just said, I'm in active pursuit of learning about this. And my core skills are aligned this way. That's all I said. The second, right behind it was, I have a background in. So the first paragraph's all sharing yourself. So the second sentence was, I have a background in, and I generally would say what I have done in my past. I didn't list off dates. It's not a resume, just generally what my background is. Then the next paragraph, which I believe is the next little, yeah. Then the second paragraph began, and which just said, I would appreciate some time to meet with you to talk about or learn more about, and then I would fill that in, what it is. I say that for the second paragraph. People say, well, why didn't you make that first in the first part? Because what I found was when I did that through trial and error, people would not read past the first sentence because they don't necessarily want to meet with you if they don't know you. But if in the first paragraph you're sharing you, they may get, oh, this sounds very, this is interesting. Huh, I'm learning about someone. This is interesting. Second paragraph is like, oh, I would want to talk to you. And hopefully you will have gotten them, you've gotten some sort of buy-in in the first paragraph because you shared authentically who you are, which is why you do step one. You see, so there's some connection there. You've done the research to know who you are and you share it authentically in that first paragraph. That's where I think I got traction because I couldn't get that in the resume. For some reason, it was not working. Maybe because I hadn't done the work to know what I really wanted and it wasn't reflected in my resume. That's a possibility. But I went the informational interviewing route, and today I still am finding that when I am looking for something, that's usually the way I find it, rather than submitting a resume that kind of goes off into the ether. So then the last part of the email was, if you have time, not longer than 30 minutes to meet with me, please send me your best dates and times and I will confirm. That's what I ended the email with. And I think that's, yeah. Yeah. So then in terms of preparing for the meeting, I've got to make sure my timing is yeah, okay. So in terms of preparing for the meeting, what does that mean? That means basically going back to the websites that you learned about the company or their LinkedIn profiles. And basically I would write down all that information before I walked into the meeting. And I would have it on another index pad because I always have paper, and I would have it in a little binder and it was open. And I would have it open. It's not a test for my memory. It was so that I could refer to it. So I would start with saying, so I see you've done these things, and that really made me interested in getting to talk with you because, as you saw in my informational interview request email, in that first paragraph, these are the things that I'm really interested in. So I saw that, there might be some kind of connection here, and I just was fascinated to learn more about what you do. Okay. So then, yeah, there's a picture of the LinkedIn. So then the questions. I asked the same 5 questions. And yeah, if you just stay here, I'll just tell you, I didn't write them on a slide, so I'll tell you, but they're simple. It's wide open and they're open-ended on purpose. Now, certainly you can get more detailed questions if you feel like that's appropriate, add them. But what I asked almost all the time, because I could get a bigger picture view, was first, tell me about your career path. I would ask them that at first because people do like to share themselves. So they'll like, and then I would be listening for their LinkedIn. Well, yeah, I've read their profile. So it's just interesting to see what they would include and what they wouldn't. And then I was listening for like energy level when they would talk about it. Because what if it's something they did in their previous career that interests you more? Well, you can shift your informational interview to go, hey, I'm interested, not necessarily, I am interested in what you're doing now, but I'm also interested in what that experience was like. Because if that's something that's interesting to you, you certainly are clearly capable of saying in that moment, that's very exciting to me. So it's really about planting those seeds for them too. Like they're fascinated that you might be fascinated in something else that they did. Huh. Right. Okay. The second question was, what inspires you or motivates you in what you do now or in those other roles that if you want them to focus on another role, ask them about that. But what inspires you about what you do? Then the third question was, what do you find challenging in your role? And that was always very interesting because what you're getting is the things that inspire them. Do they inspire me? Hmm. If they did, I would say, oh, that's very exciting. The things that they say are challenging, would those be the same challenges for you? Or would they not? And that would be an interesting thing to share in the informational interview. As I hear yourself say that, that's something that, it sounds very challenging for you. That is something I really like doing. You see what you're doing? You're planting a seed. You're not saying, I could do your job better. That's not what you're just saying, this is what, oh, I like doing those kind of things. So there's a difference. Okay. And then the last two questions. Would it be all right if I keep you updated on my progress as I do this informational interviewing path? Most people would say yes, but it's really giving you a door to future conversations. It's opening the door. And then the last question is, we've gotten a chance to get to know each other here. This has been marvelous. I'm wondering who you suggest I might connect with next to learn more. That's where the phrase to learn more is important because I need to trust that you're going to have the same conversation with the person they're referring you to. And they don't want it to turn into like, do you have a job here? Um, that would make them uncomfortable. So it's just to learn more, just like what we've done here is what I would do with who you talk with. And then I would realize that people first might be a little reluctant and then they're like, oh, well, as I think about it, I can think of a couple people. I made sure I wrote those names down and I thank them for those names. And I said, I'll reach out to them is what I would say to them. And sometimes they'd call each other in between. One of the job offers that happened for me was they called the person right after and they said, I met with this person named Tracy Jenkins. She seemed really interested in just like what I was doing. And I thought I referred her to you. And then that person, when I came in, said, I talked to so and so that you had met with, and they just thought you were so enthusiastic. I'm almost interested in calling this like a job interview conversation right now and get to know you a little bit more because we are starting to open a position. Or we don't. One of them said, this has happened in another instance, said, we don't have a job yet, but we expect that one will open. Um, so then they let me know that the job opened and said, go in there and apply. And then they pulled it off. So there you go. So always ask that question. The interview itself is quite self-explanatory. Let's see, I'm going to move a little faster so you can have time to ask questions. I go in, I introduce myself, I restate what my email said. That's the overview. I would ask my 5 questions. And the final questions always were, can I keep you updated on progress? Yes. Who do you suggest I connect with next? And then I thank them. And it would be over before I knew it. That half hour would often go really fast. And oftentimes if they were really invested, they'd say, can you stay? I'm really enjoying this. I can go a little longer. The final step, which is step 7, is following up. So always often people are concerned about stalking, like I don't want to, just keep sending them. The thing that I think is really beautiful about the follow-up is it's your chance to really express gratitude for the experience because they did this they didn't have to, they're not getting paid to. So I would always open, and it's a chance to really let them know that they made a difference in your life. So the follow-up that I would include I think there should be, yeah, there. I would rethank, and then I would say, what did I learn when I say lessons? I mean, what did I learn? So I would say, thank you for this time. I know that you did this and, it was very thoughtful of you to take the time out of your day. And then I would say, what I learned from you. And I take notes during the informational interview. So I have index pads of notes from each. I think I have 3 or 4 and I'm not exactly sure if they're still in here. They were, but a page for each interview. So I went through a couple index pads. And I could look at what I learned and then I would just type in the things I learned were these things. And then going forward, I intend to connect with the people you suggested, and I write those names again. And that's the way to remind them that, like, it's actually going to happen. It wasn't like I was not going to do it. And I did. I followed through on all the um, referrals because I thought, they spent the time mentioning those people, so I need to follow up. And oftentimes it was a great reference, and that tree got larger. So I'm going to stop there and let you have a chance to ask questions if you have any. But this is the opportunity. I love Abraham Lincoln's quote here. The best way to predict your future is to create it for yourself. And that's what informational interviewing did for me. And I hope it will for you too.
Thanks, Tracy. That was really helpful. So the first question is, do you use the phrase informational interview, or is there another word or phrase that you should use asking people to meet or talk with you?
Yeah. Great. I always miss this in the presentation because you'll ask about the subject line in the email, and that's where, like, what do you put in the subject line? So if you notice when I talked about it in the email, I said I would appreciate some time to meet with you. So I didn't use the word informational interview in the email itself. In the subject line, um, I I actually did use. I wrote informational interview request, and then I would somehow from if it was someone who if I worked at GSK and I was wanting the informational interview, I say from former employee from GSK, but I would try to say something from an individual, and I use my core skills in that statement, maybe just one of them, just to kind of like personalize the informational interview request. So it was not just like, because you could see them buzz by that, right? So if you create something that makes it personalized after you say that, I just felt it was inauthentic not to have that in the subject line. It felt a little like, I'm going to try to get you to open this and then I'm going to ask you, so I did that. You could just say a chance, an opportunity to learn could be another way of putting it in the subject line. So you'll get a sense of what feels good, and it is a trial and error process.
So in general, who should you contact for informational interviews, and what is the approach that someone should take to find the right contact for an informational interview?
Well, that's the thing. The word right can be a word that could get in your way. I had to, and that's part of the reason for doing the Venn diagram, was I had to get out of my way of thinking there's the absolute perfect informational interview out there and I need to nail it, rather than I'm out there talking to people, and sometimes I'm on the periphery talking to people that maybe not the exact role that I want, but it's through that process I'm getting names of people which bring me in closer to that circle. So I started with any name I could get that if I looked them up on LinkedIn, they seemed really interesting, like interesting people. So that was my litmus test first. And then, through my authentic expression of myself through the email and then what I shared in the informational interview, people understood me. So then I would get more targeted names. So I think I started broad and then I got narrow very quickly just based on who they thought I should talk to.
Great, thank you. So Tracy, you talked about looking for a job with relevant experience, but what advice would you have for someone who is looking for a job in a field that they have no relevant experience in, but they're willing to learn if they have job training? What advice would you have for those job seekers?
Yes. And actually the field I ended up, I had no real relevant experience. And that was actually revealed to me by one of the people I was informational interviewing, who just basically said, I hear you talking about this. Have you considered this field? It was out of left field. I didn't even think about that. And I'm like, because the person, I think you'd be really good at that. Had you not thought about that? I said, no, I hadn't, but writing it down. And I said, do you know people in that area that might be interesting to talk to, for me to talk to? And oh yeah. And that led me down a path that was very different than what I thought initially. Now to start, Um, how so if it's something that's not relevant, like I explained the person that wanted to do gardening, and she was an IBMer, so there's a complete, almost 180 to what she had been doing before then. Um, her process was, she started to make inroads into that space, and it was some informational interviewing and exploring training. And so she could put that in her first paragraph. And so they're like, oh, I see. So you're not doing it now, but you are making inquiries because it aligns with what you do well. So that's why that part of those core skills are most likely very transferable into various areas, right? So if you list those out and then still say, I have a background in this. However, these core skills that I mentioned previously very much align with this space, and I'm making efforts to explore this area. And these are some of the things I've done thus far, right? So that could all be in the first paragraph, and then they get it, and they're more likely to go, oh, well, this sounds interesting. This person's doing something completely different. Might be interesting to meet this person.
A couple more questions just came in. So, is it better to invite someone to do the informational interview in person over coffee or lunch, or have you found better success doing a phone call instead?
Yeah, that so back in the day, and I told you this was a while back, 10 before COVID, long before a little bit. Um, I would try to get into their office spaces because then I could kind of like super sleuth as I walk through. You kind of get a sense of the culture, people, that kind of stuff. And they would, if they felt they could trust you and it was not in a high security type of office space, obviously they would be less likely. And then I would leave it up to them. You noticed in my email I didn't say where we would meet or how we would meet. I asked about the times they could meet, and then they often would suggest, how about we meet at Starbucks, or how about I meet you over the phone. And I would just go with their lead. I would follow them, because that was probably, I wouldn't want to make it difficult for them. So that's how I did it. There's no I that there's I don't think there's a problem meeting at Starbucks, as long as in your email you've basically stated what you want to learn. Then that becomes the focus. What happens when you just say informational interview and you don't share yourself like you could do on a LinkedIn request? They don't know enough about your intentions, enough about you, so that the first 20 minutes of your coffee is spent explaining all that, and now you've got 10 minutes to really do your question asking. And so you want to set the stage beforehand, and that's why the email is helpful rather than the LinkedIn request. And so when you have that formal process already set up and they know that that's what's going to happen, it really doesn't matter where you meet. Phone, you're going to be doing the same thing, asking those same questions, and hopefully getting some really valuable information. And honestly, I never found an informational interview that was redundant or not worth my time, because I always learned something, even if it was not what I wanted to learn. I'd like, well, that was not the path I needed to go on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So a great question here. What are your thoughts or your advice on taking steps back in order to take steps forward in something that you've identified might be closer to that center of your Venn diagram, that dream job?
So I'm curious about what steps back means. What I'm interpreting it to mean is that, steps outside of your current sphere of being. I'm interpreting that. I could be wrong, but yeah. So the question was, what's your advice in doing that? Is that what it was? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it worth it to take a step back, maybe in salary or responsibility, in order to move forward, to get closer to that centerpiece of the Venn diagram?
So that is a choice you're going to make. And I know you asked for advice. um, I, in the work I've done with people and for myself, I will say it's hugely important to honor those what you do well and love doing. And when you're not honoring those, you start to feel slightly sideways in your life. And it's really honoring who you are, where you shine, where you step into your magnificence, if I want to go that far. and that's those two spheres when they enter, not the what you get paid to, what you love doing and do well. That's the key to your unlocking. And if that is important to you, if that's what you really want, then any steps you take, I prefer not to use the word back, any steps you take will get you closer to that is worth taking.
Love that. So we have somebody asking in general if you could share a little bit about how much they could expect to pay for a career coach service.
Oh, they're asking how much is a general, yeah, and so I think the going rate for career coaching is like 150 an hour, I think is what it is. I've seen some that are around 200, um, but that seems to be the going rate. Back in the day, and I don't think it's changed that much. I think it's still around 150 to 2.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, insurance doesn't pay for it. That's a sticking point for a lot of people. For me, the investment was entirely worth it because I mean, that was 15 years ago and I'm still talking to you about it. So
Great. That is all of the questions we have so far. If anybody has anything additional, put it in the chat. And if we have time, or the Q&A, if we have time, we'll get to it. I do want to spend just a couple of quick minutes telling you a little bit about a couple of great resources that NC Biotech offers that can help you as you are starting to sort of explore your career journey. So let me go ahead and share my screen quickly. And thanks for bearing with us as we're dealing with some technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Let me get this box out of the way. Sorry, the share box is right in my screen. Okay, so BioJobs Hub, this is the first one that I'm going to share with you. This is a fantastic resource. Here you can learn about training programs for biomanufacturing and for contract research jobs. You can take a career quiz. So you can see here right on that front page, we've got the career quiz to help you narrow down where might be the best fit for you. And then you can also go ahead and search entry level and early career positions that are available now. So some of these may be internships or postdoc positions. Some of them are going to be true entry level positions, internships, things like that. So you can click on a job and it'll take you right to that job posting. Now, these postings are all also on the North Carolina Biotechnology Center's Career Center. So I'm going to share these links in the chat with you once I finish talking. I just can't multitask like that. But the NC Biotech Career Center is another great resource. This is going to be a site that has all of those entry level and early career positions, as well as mid-career and more senior roles as well. So you can search by a keyword. So let's say you're interested particularly in biomanufacturing. You can plug that in and click this search button. I'll do that in just a moment, but you can also set up an alert. So if you know you're interested in biomanufacturing, you want to see everything that comes through, go ahead, click that box, put your email in, and then when you search for the jobs, I've got to uncheck that to get that to go. When you search for the jobs, it'll set up an alert for you so that you will receive an email anytime anything in that area is posted. So that's a really great way to sort of keep your feelers out without actively having to do anything. The Career Center also offers some, I'm going back to the wrong place. Let me do this. The Career Center also offers some great resources for job seekers. So you can see here on the right-hand side of that main page, it also offers resume review. You can upload a resume. An expert will review it and provide you with feedback. Keep in mind, this is going to be very broad because this is not going to be biotech specific or life sciences specific. This is somebody at the job board vendor who is doing this resume review. So you may want to take things with a grain of salt, but it can be really helpful to sort of get another set of eyes on your resume and get some of that feedback on some of those things that you should change that are universal across different industries. And then scrolling down a little bit further, we also have the career planning portal. So you can read articles about different careers, skills that you may need or want to brush up on, what folks are looking for in a resume. So you can really kind of dig into what's current in the research and get a feel for how to proceed forward in your search. And the last resource that I'm going to share with you is the NC Biotech Company Directory. So if you are at the point where you sort of know maybe what you want to do, but you don't even have a sense of what companies are doing those types of work in North Carolina, the NC Biotech Company Directory is a comprehensive listing of the bioscience companies in North Carolina, as well as companies that are either support companies or related companies. So this can be a really great starting point for you to start exploring companies. Say, for instance, you're really interested in biodefense. We have that popular search there. You can just click that button. That's going to pull up all of the companies that are in biodefense. You can click into the listing, and if we have a website, it'll be there. You can, learn a little bit more about what the company does, how they work within that field. So this is obviously a consulting company. They're doing IT services, regulatory consulting. If that's something that really excites you, you can click into their website and then explore their careers through their site. And then one last resource that kind of popped into my mind as Tracy was talking, I do not get kickbacks, but Apollo.io is a really fantastic resource for finding email addresses for people at companies. I use this all of the time in my work. You do have to create an account, and the reason for that is that they are mining your information too as you're doing that, so keep that in mind. But for instance, let's say I want to find somebody at, here's a good example, Genome Web. You can search for that company name, and then it's got this employees button. You can see the people here, and let's say that the precision medicine reporter is the person you think that is the best fit for the person you want to talk to. Access that email. You get, I think, 50 for free each month. And here's their business email right here. So it's a creepy resource, I know, but one that I use all the time in my work and could be really, really helpful for getting to those contacts who might be useful for you in informational interviews. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to drop those links in the chat for you. It looks like we don't have any other questions. So if you want to just stay on until you have those links, and then I think we are all set. Tracy, thank you again so much for your time. This was really fantastic. I know folks came away with a lot of great resources that'll be really useful for them. And like I said at the beginning, informational interviewing was so important for me, and I know it was for you too, Tracy. So hopefully this makes a difference for some folks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.